Hey guys, welcome back to Vertical Momentum. I'm your host, Richard Kaufman, also known as the Comeback Coach. Guys, this episode is going to be mind-blowing. My brother, a new friend I just made, truly an amazing hero, amazing gentleman. He's a Green Beret actor, author of one of my favorite books of all time. We're going to be talking about that today. Scott Mann, Lieutenant Colonel, retired. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you doing?
Hey, Richard. Thanks for having me on. Happy New Year, happy holidays, and all that good stuff, man. Doing good and ready to get after another year.
I love it. Hopefully, you're getting beautiful weather in Florida. In New Jersey, it's about 60 today, so I'm really appreciating it today.
Well, there's guys, you don't want to hear this probably, but like there's guys, you can't see it from where I'm sitting, but they're jet skiing on the river behind me here. So it's a little different than New Jersey.
All right, guys, we got to go. It's been a nice show. All right, so let's hop back. Well, first, because if I don't ask this question, if I forget to ask it because I got a traumatic brain injury, if I don't ask it, I'll forget. What is your definition of resiliency?
To me, resiliency is being able to get back up when you get knocked down over the long haul, the trajectory of your journey.
And I like that because I always hear people say, get knocked down, get back up, but nobody ever mentioned the long haul, which I think is the most important part because you can get up, but still 20 years down the road, still be struggling with that one thing.
Right. Well, and you think about like so many of our brothers and sisters that are coming out of the military, how many times do they have to get back up? Well, the answer to that question is as long as it takes, right? And until you get to that next ridgeline. And I think that can be really challenging. It was for me when I was transitioning out of the military. I kept asking myself, how many times, am I going to get knocked down? And how many times do I have to keep getting back up? Is there an end to this? And I think that for me, like thinking about resistance, it is a goal-oriented, or resilience. It is a goal-oriented endeavor in which you got to get up multiple times over the life of that journey that you're on. And it's not easy.
All right. So let's hop back in the Wayback Machine. Tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you grew up, and tell us a little bit about your military experience.
Okay. Well, let's see. I'm Anita and Rex Mann's son, both civil servants. My mom was a teacher. My dad was a forest ranger. Fought big wildland fires, and we grew up mostly in little logging towns all over the South. I spent a lot of my time in although most of my family's from the mountains of North Carolina, I grew up primarily in rural Arkansas. And when I was about 14 years old, a Green Beret named Mark walked into our soda shop where I was hanging out in this little town that didn't even have a stoplight. And every head in that place turned to look at this guy, and he ended up talking to me. I went up and I talked to him. He talked to me, and he, at 14 years old, he explained to me that he was a Green Beret, that he was in Army Special Forces, and explained to me that Green Berets work primarily with indigenous people, by, with, and through. They build relationships. And I was a runt of a kid, Richard, and pretty bullied. And this just sounded so amazing to me. Both the way this guy carried himself, just like super unassuming, saw me, had the wherewithal to see me as this little run of a kid and sit down and talk with me. And that alone really moved me. But what he told me about the mission of unconventional warfare, of working by, with, and through indigenous people and helping the little guy stand up against the big guy, man, that was it for me. So at 14 in a little logging town, that's when I decided to become a Green Beret.
All right. So now let's talk about being a Green Beret, because one of my best friends and one of the greatest people of all time, his name is Lane Malone, Green Beret, and one of the biggest hearts I've ever met. But, we talk a lot, and I've had several Green Berets, Navy SEALs. And so going through selection process, I'm sure you've seen a lot of people quit. What, with people that you've made it and the people that made it through with you, what were some of the things that helped them make it through the selection process? So I know it's not easy, right?
No, all of the elite organizations have some kind of selection, whether it's being an air commando, Marines, a Marine Raider, Navy SEAL, Army Ranger, you name it. Like, they all have a selection, and they're all very, very difficult. And remember too, Richard, that all of our elite organizations have a primary mission that is in its own way very unique from the other organizations. Now, the bulk of the Army special, the bulk of the Army special operators are direct action. They do like surgical strike, direct action type missions. Whereas the Special Forces Green Berets, they are more of a by, with, and through relationship building. I tell people that a modern day Green Beret is kind of a combination between John Wick, Lawrence of Arabia, and the Verizon guy, or the Sprint guy, or whatever we call him these days. In other words, they're these relationship-based connectors who just happen to be lethal. And so that is the essence of what these guys do. And getting through selection involves not only tough, demanding physical stuff, but it also involves how well you can build relationships and how well you can build connections with someone who's radically different than you. You're graded, you're evaluated on your ability to establish rapport very quickly. And function as a member of a team. So it's a range of those things. I would say for me, getting through all of it, and I think a lot of SF guys would agree, is just that it's a career move. Like, it's what you're going to do for the rest of your life. So that, like, this is it, man. This 3-week period, will determine if I'm going to be able to do this for the rest of my life or not.
And I think the SF community, it's a very tight-knit community. Even when guys get out, they're always talking about the SF community. So, and I think I'm a big relationship guy. I believe in building generational relationships, whether it's business, whether it's what we're talking about. Now that you're on the show, hopefully we can build a generational relationship. And I think in any aspect of life, I think relationships is the number one key. It's building relationships, right?
100%, man. It's such a big deal. I mean, like, I tell people, I call it social capital, Richard. And it's not just in special forces. If you look at the low trust world that we live in today, this period of churn that we're in, where we are disengaged, disconnected, distracted, those are kind of the places that we had to work growing up in special forces, those rough outlying areas where trust was so depleted. And relationships are everything, man. Relationships, there's a saying, I think it's by Alan Weiss, this consultant. He says, logic makes people think, emotion makes people act, and relationships are the conductors of emotions. And I believe that's absolutely true. And the more high stakes, the more dangerous the situations get, the more imminent the situations get, the more important relationships are.
Now, especially in the teams, teams and your forces, I believe that, you are your battle buddies. It's all about knowing that somebody has your back and you have somebody else's back. It's just like, for me, when I'm my tank crew, I knew I had my gunner's back, my driver, my loader, and we were all we needed if we needed it.
Yeah.
Is that something the way you guys were taught from day one to survive?
Absolutely. I mean, look, you're spot on with your analogy within a tank, or a mechanized fighting vehicle, or a SEAL platoon, or even an air squadron. I mean, there is a certain element of I have your back, you have my back, that is very unique to the military. And this is one of the reasons too, Richard, I believe that it's so difficult for a lot of us to transition out of the military, because I've studied civil society as a Green Beret. We're kind of like anthropologists with guns. I mean, we study civil society in a very big way. And one of the things that I know is that when we're in the military, it's tribal. It's a collective. It's honor based. You put your own personal needs aside for the betterment of the collective, the squad, the team, the detachment, the squadron. Whereas and then you walk right out of the civilian world, and 24 hours later, it's the opposite. The civilian sector is all about the individual by design. Our Constitution is designed that way, that we put the individual above all else. And that's a good thing. But when you're coming out of a world that your entire existence has been based on your status within the tribe, that's a hard thing to do, especially when you take purpose out of the equation as well. But one other thing I'll say about special forces that maybe is a bit unique is that in addition to that team concept, you also have a partner concept, a host nation partner that you work, fights, bleed with, and you are responsible for recruiting, equipping, training, and then combat advising at their shoulder what they do in these rough places as they stand up on their own. And that is a unique thing. A lot of us did that in the war on terror, but Green Berets have been doing that since 1952, or even back in World War II when OSS were doing this with French partisans. Like, working with indigenous people is our bread and butter. So there's another layer to what we do. And that's why so many Green Berets were up in arms with what happened in Afghanistan. And it's why I wrote Pineapple Express.
Okay, so now, we're going to dig right into that, because like I told you earlier, and I've read over 6,000 books, and this is one of my favorites. It's actually because
Thank you.
for me, I'm a low-tech redneck. So even for me, it was like watching a movie. So it was very easy to read, very easy to digest. So now, you did over 20 years. You were in Ecuador, Iraq, Afghanistan. You've done all that stuff, but I think probably this is probably one of your crowning jewel, I would say. So take us back to August 26th, 2021, and what really happened, because I've had Lieutenant Colonel Scheller's been on here telling the truth. We're not BSing, because what happened was the day after that happened, I knew so many people that took their own lives that next day because they felt like, wow, this is total bullshit. So many people that I served with that I lost for no reason.
Yeah. Well, what I'll start with, Richard, and I'm sorry for the loss of your buddies, man. I saw a lot of that, and I'm still seeing that. I think we are still seeing this as a result of the abandonment that happened. So let's unpack it. The first thing I will say is I want to thank you for the analogy of the hero at the beginning, but it's one that I have to push back on. I'm not, but I did serve with a lot of heroes. I served with some amazing men and women, and quite a few of them are not around anymore. And for me, watching what unfolded in 2021 brought all that back. It brought back the loss of friends. It brought back buddies who were gravely wounded and still are, both inside and outside. And, even just the loss of our youth, the post 9/11 veteran generation is less than 1% of the American population. Yet we gave most of our youth over to this war, and willingly so. We saw what happened on 9/11 with the worst attack in American history. We saw the fact that the 9/11 Commission made it clear that there was no substantive ground intelligence leading up to 9/11. There was no partner capability leading up, even though Ahmed Shah Massoud was screaming to the heavens that Al-Qaeda was planning an attack against the West. He even came to Europe to try to warn us. We blew him off. And so we saw all that, Richard. And so we went over there and we fought in places like Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan. And in the process of doing that, we kept violent extremists at bay for 20 years. And we managed to institute an intelligence capability, a ground network that was very substantial in those places, certainly in Afghanistan. And we built in Afghanistan a partner military that, a lot of it was messed up, man. It was jacked up. The Afghan National Army at the general purpose level, and the Afghan National Police, there was a lot of corruption and graft, and they abandoned their posts many times, certainly during the end. But they also had about 66,000 KIA killed in action over the period of the war. And their special operations organization, the commandos, the Kosk-Tejas, the Afghan Special Forces, the Special Mission Unit, the NMRG, they carried 98.5% of the load. They were doing the bulk of the fighting, and were very good at it. And had we stayed with them, I believe, in a foreign internal defense kind of way over the long haul, they probably could have sustained, along with a counterterror force from the U.S., stability in that country over the long period. And so watching all of that unfold, Richard, and seeing everything that we had invested in this, our friends that we had lost, it nearly broke me, man. And I think had it not been for that young man, Nizam, the commando that I had met in 2010 asking for help, I think I would have probably gone down to a dark place along with some of these other guys that did. I don't know what the outcome would have been, but it wouldn't have been good. But it kind of gave me a way to do something. And at the time, that was all I wanted to do, was just do something to help this one young man who had done so much for me.
So, tell us a little bit about your book, why you wrote it. And like for me, I love how deep you go into detail about each individual person, because a lot of times when, we talk about Afghanis or Iraqis, we have this one thing in our mind, but you actually humanize every single person. So talk a little bit about your book.
I appreciate that, man. That was my goal, was to humanize and to present a human level discussion that had not occurred up until this point, because it struck me that as all of this happened in Afghanistan, yes, we saw images of Afghans falling off of planes and horrific images at the gate, but then it was just gone. It just disappeared from the news. There was this narrative put forward by the administration and even others on the Republican side that the Afghans didn't fight, which is patently false. There was a lot of stuff, including Ukraine, that just completely shifted focus away from Afghanistan. And for those of us who got involved, the veteran volunteers and other volunteer groups, we were still involved after the ISIS explosion. For example, we still had about 6,000 people on our manifest at Pineapple that did not get out, that we ended up raising money for and working with other groups like Operation Recovery to provide safe houses, babies born in these safe houses, food drops, medical care, you name it. And we were doing this all the way through the winter of 21, 22. We're still doing it now. And I just decided, I think it was around November of 2021. It'd been several months since the explosion and the collapse. And I thought, I don't think anybody's going to get the real story of what happened here. And at the time, I didn't know that a couple other books were being written, but I just decided, I'm a storyteller. That's really what I'm best at. And I thought, I'm going to write this book and I'm going to tell the story from the street level. I'm going to tell it through the lens of the Afghan commandos and interpreters who risked everything and the veterans who stood at their shoulder. And I'm going to ask two simple questions. What does a promise mean to you? And how far would you go to honor it? And that's what I did. And I conducted interviews with literally hundreds of Afghans who went through Pineapple Express, and the shepherds, what we call the volunteers who were at their shoulder, hours and countless hours of interviews. And then I reconstructed those interviews into a big story that moves towards, through a sewage canal and a 4-foot hole in the fence that we called the Pineapple Express. And then these micro stories that are very personal, very human, and allow the reader to just drop in and walk through that shit-filled trench with Hasina, or be on the ground weeping with Steve as his partners asking him to please help him because they're beating my wife. Like, I wanted people to feel an emotional, visceral level what this was. And that's really what that book was about.
And, and I got really aggravated, watching it, being a veteran. I mean, as a, I guess I'm like you. I always say I'm no hero, but I served next to plenty of them. And when I seen that happen, and then I had Scheller come on the show, and then to find out that he gets busted, he goes to jail for speaking the truth. And me and you get in touch, and I read your book, and I'm even more infuriated because it's not being talked about. I can turn on no matter what end, whether it's CNN, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You don't hear about Syria anymore. You don't hear about Afghanistan. You don't hear about any of this stuff. And it's like, poof, the magic dragon. It's gone. Yeah. It didn't happen.
Yeah, it's really a shame. And you bring up a great point. And there was a study, Richard, done, I believe it was in November of 2021, following the collapse and the systemic abandonment of our partners by the U.S. government. And in this study, it was by a group called Better Together, and it was called After Kabul. I'll try to send you the link. I invite your your viewers and listeners to check it out, because it really explores the impact at a street level, visceral level, that this had on war veterans, particularly post 9/11 veterans and Afghan war veterans. And what came out of this that was really, really striking was that 3 out of 5 veterans feel like a stranger in their own country. 73% of veterans feel betrayed by what happened in Afghanistan, and 68% feel humiliated. And then you add that to the fact that we already have an astronomical mental health, suicide, homelessness, PTS rate, and now you add this moral injury, which is a violation of one's moral code of what one knows to be right. It is a devil's cocktail. It really is. And I believe we are on the front end of a mental health tsunami right now. And the part that's frustrating about this, back to your original point, you don't hear our politicians talking about it on either side of the aisle. You do not hear our generals or admirals, past or present, talking about it. And these are men and women who, after 9/11, raised their hand and said, send me. And don't just send me once, send me twice, send me 3 times, send me 5 times. Yep, I know my family's suffering from this. I know my wife's going to leave me. Yep, I know I lost my best friend. Yep, I know I lost my leg. Send me. And just over and over and over again, these men and women kept going back for 20 years in some cases. Yeah. And then we just turned the page on them like it never even happened. And we left them not only wondering what the hell the last 20 years was just about, but then we actually put it on them to answer the phone and provide some type of humanitarian support with their checking accounts and their pension funds to what was easily an Uncle Sam sized problem, as my friend Duke says. And that, to me, it is beyond egregious. It is incorrigible that this happened, and that no one threw their rank on the table over this, that no one made a stand publicly over this in the political realm, except Stu. And, you know, I still scratch my head at that. And I say that openly in my epilogue, and I stand beside it. I don't say it shrill or with spew. I'm just amazed that we could do this to an entire generation of veterans who so quietly, diligently, and loyally did what they did for this nation. To treat them like that at the end, I can't get my head around it.
And, you know, it feels like, and for some reason, like I said, Scott or Sir, I'm just so grateful that we finally got to connect. I've had like lieutenant colonels on for like the last week.
Bless your heart. I'm sorry.
I've more lieutenant colonels than I think I did when I got my punishments. You know, I've talked with you, Lieutenant Colonel Slade, Murray, Curran, and it's amazing how, you know, no matter what rank we are, whether it's sergeant, whether it's a private, whether it's a colonel, we all still feel the same anger over the issue, you know?
Yeah.
So,
of course.
and for me, like, I was a tanker for 23 years, and I seen, okay, they're building up. It took them like 6 to 12 months just to get all the vehicles into Afghanistan. How are you going to get all the vehicles out within 2 weeks? It just didn't make any sense whatsoever.
No.
So we left all our shit there.
Billions and billions of dollars that were given to the Taliban, basically. And this wasn't just like non-lethal items. These were war fighting machines, weapon platforms, sensors, optics, personal protection equipment. And then, you know, to add insult to injury, I just had Ahmed Shah Massoud and Congressman Waltz on my podcast, along with this guy named Legend, who's an Afghan-American Army NCO who ended up going into Afghanistan after the collapse and rescuing people personally. You should have him on your show. But they were saying that there's about $40 million a week right now going to the Taliban from the United States in the form of humanitarian aid that is completely non-controlled. It is going right into the hands of the Taliban. And there are 27 violent extremist organizations operating openly with the sanction or with the, with the acceptance of the Taliban inside Afghanistan right now, to include Al Qaeda and ISIS. And, what's it going to look like when the next catastrophic attack hits the West, or God forbid, our homeland? And we can literally show that the U.S. government, after this horrific collapse and systemic abandonment, is sending $40 million a week to the Taliban. How do you even begin to reconcile that with, our veteran population, our Gold Star families? You add the equipment that was left behind to this thing. Like, there needs to be serious accountability around this, and there needs to be lessons learned from this, none of which have occurred. This goes back to my point, and why I'm so adamant about this in my epilogue, Richard, is that no one has been held accountable at any level, and there's been no lessons learned. So for all intents and purposes, this is okay. It's okay to do this kind of thing. And if you think about it, we have been since the Montagnards in 1965 through 672. We were abandoning them. We've abandoned the Syrian Kurds. We've abandoned the Iraqi military. Like, over and over again, we have a multi-decade habit of systemic abandonment of our allies. And if we don't get this straight, my concern, not only are we heaping a moral injury and a mental health tsunami on our veteran population, but we are putting the country at a level of national risk. And I believe this, that we have not seen since pre-9/11.
Yeah. And now, and one thing, it really gets me aggravated. I was the worst soldier you could ever see, until 9/11 changed my whole life and trajectory of my career. But I got a field grade Article 15 for losing my weapon. So I got a 45 and 45. We found a weapon, but now there's hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment, and it wasn't just a rifle. This is like all these kinds of major equipment, and nobody's in trouble. It's like nobody signed for this shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's amazing. And again, no one's talking about it. Nothing to see here. These are not the droids you're looking for. And it's unbelievable, right? It's unbelievable, the level of institutional abandonment and irresponsibility that's in play right now, and the level of careerism, frankly. And I get it, that, because I hear this a lot, is, well, the politicians make the decisions, we just follow orders. We're not supposed to do that when the orders are immoral. We're not supposed to do that when it is the wholesale abandonment of a multi-year partner force, right? That is, or potential illegal abandonment of weapons and turnover of weapons to a named enemy, right? It's just, there's so much there, Richard. And again, the book was my attempt to bring this out, to start the conversation. There's a lot of other books that have been written, a lot more are coming. My hope is that the book turns into a movie where more people will become aware of it. And we're also doing a play on it to help people understand the cost of modern war. Like, there's got to be, I think, a lot of work on this front, because I've even heard general officers, and I'll throw it back over to you, but I've heard general officers in the last few months say, hey, post 9/11 veterans, be careful about this talk about betrayal and moral injury, because it makes you sound like a victim. Really? Are these the victims that are like cashing in their kids' saving college fund to keep Afghans alive? Or are these victims that have like re-experienced their PTS as a result of one of their partners being executed and them getting photos of it? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. And for us to treat as officers and senior enlisted, for us to treat our veterans this way and our Gold Star families, and no one raised this up to the level of accountability and lessons learned. It's just not how I was brought up. And I think a lot of people agree with that.
Well, like me, I got thrown out the first time in the military for being a drug addict. I got back in, and I changed my life because of 9/11. But, I became Soldier of the Year. But once I became a non-commissioned officer, And I really believed in the soldier creed. I
Mm-hmm.
believed in the NCO creed. I always believed that, no man left behind. I always believed that, you know, I'll give my life so my guys can come home. And then when you get to what happened, it whatever happened to no man left behind. It just
Yeah.
disappeared.
Yeah.
There wasn't anybody saying, because even like old John Wayne movies, you always watch him. He'd always say, we don't leave anybody behind. But now it's how many did we leave behind? They said they're all out. Bullshit. It's bullshit. They're
They're
not all
not.
out.
No, they're not all out. Not even all the, I think not all the green card holders are out. And, there are, if you talk to Vietnam veterans who were SF guys who fought with the Montagnards, they'll to this day, many of them will weep when they bring up their Montagnard partners and how they were left behind and how they were experienced, genocide and were wiped out, many of them. And, this is serious stuff. This kind of moral injury is an injury on the soul. And it's one of the most dangerous post-combat things that we can lay at the feet of our veteran population, because it exacerbates other pre-existing things like PTS, TBI, depression. When you add a moral injury into the mix, even if you address those other things, a lot of studies show it's still very, very prevalent. And we know for a fact that with moral injury that it requires leadership involvement. Leaders have to get involved. They have to take personal responsibility for what occurred. They have to start to dig into that and look for ways to put processes in place so that there are assurances made to those who the moral injury was experienced that it won't happen again, particularly to our kids. Look at the senior leaders right now, how they're scratching their heads around recruiting and retention. And they're coming up with all these wazoo things to include that this Generation Z doesn't have a proclivity to serve. I don't buy that. I think that they actually see what's going on. And so many of them come from military families that the family members are saying, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't be part of it right now if I were you because of what they did to my partner force. And if we can't figure that out at a senior leader level, I don't know what the hell's the matter with us. I really don't, because that is so obvious to me that this is not about the shortcomings of our civil society or the shortcomings of our younger generation. Every younger generation has something that we're bitching about. They did it with us. I mean, look at what you went through in recovery and what I went through in recovery, right? I mean, that's not the issue. The issue is leadership, in my assessment. And right now, it's in short supply.
All right. So then, before I want to dig deep into the moral injury, because that's something you'll never hear about. You don't hear about moral injury at all. But I want to dig deep. But first of all, I want to thank our sponsors. As you guys know, I was in the military for 23 years, but I also was with GNC for over 30 years. And I love pre-workouts, but they always tasted like ass. So I decided to come out with my own pre-workout coffee called Vertical Momentum Coffee. Twice the amount of caffeine, twice the energy, all made by veterans' hands. So it's actually veteran hand roasted. And 100% of the proceeds go to Project Die Hard, which is when FOB Rush is made, we're going to be able to house 10 single veterans and 2 veterans with their families for a whole year. We're going to be able to take care of them physically, mentally, spiritually, feed them, get them the health they need, all for free. So if you guys love coffee, if you want to help out families, 100% of the proceeds go to help veterans struggling with mental health issues and also homelessness. So if you love coffee, let me know and I'll get you that link to you. So, sir, now you said you did 20 years, and because I want to definitely talk about what we're talking about now, but it seems, I think I'm on interview like 550. No matter what rank we get out at, no matter how many years we put in, we all have a shelf life. And when we get out of the military, no matter what your rank is, the military does not give a shit about you. Your phone stops ringing. You lose the camaraderie, and a lot of us don't have a mission. So did you start writing your book while you were still in or while you got out? And talk to us about military transitioning.
Great questions, great topics. I love it. I got out in 2013, Richard. I did almost the amount of time you did. I did almost 23 years. I was a lieutenant colonel. I was a battalion commander select. And so I had been selected for battalion command and turned it down because it was not an SF battalion. And then went back over to Afghanistan one more time and stood up a program called helped stand up a program called Village Stability Operations, where we got back to our roots and worked with local villagers, kind of a modern day Magnificent Seven, to stand up on their own. It was a very successful program. I talk a lot about it in my book, Operation Pineapple Express. This was 2010. But then when, thank you. And then when the Village Stability Program ran for a couple of years, and then it was shut down. And a lot of the villagers who we had made promises to that we would stand with them for the long haul were killed. They were hunted down and killed by the Taliban when we abandoned those villages. And frankly, it was a foreshadowing, Richard, of what was going to come with the 2021 abandonment. I saw in that moment when I got home what was going on, and I just didn't want to be a part of it anymore. I looked at the careerism that was happening in the military. I looked at how Major Jim Gant had been treated when he came back. And I looked at what was happening with Afghanistan, and particularly the abandonment of the Afghan villagers. And I just said, you know what? I think I'm done. So I hung it up. I declined command again and was told to retire with prejudice, which means basically you're never going to see the rank of 06. So hang it up. So I did. And I found that my transition was particularly hard. I got out. I was at the top of my game. I had been in almost 23 years. I retired on my terms. I was still married. My 3 boys lived right here in this house still in high school. I mean, I had a lot of stuff going for me. But within a couple of months of taking off those desert boots and putting on my Tampa Bay flip-flops, the snakes in my head started squirming hard. A lack of purpose, a lack of passion, coupled with a deep survivor's guilt that I had carried and just buried. Within 18 months, I was standing in my closet holding a 45 and no intention of coming out. And I know that on that day, had it not been for a couple of last minute things, short notice things, I would have not made it out of that closet. But I did, and eventually got connected with mentors on the civilian side who helped me connect with storytelling. And my narrative and ways to use story to heal myself, to bridge the civil military gap. And over time, incrementally, I found my voice and started to tell my story, and it healed me. But it was a long, nasty process that I would never wish on anybody.
Like for me, like I said, I got thrown out the first time, but then for the rest of my career, I did everything I could to become the ultimate soldier. I volunteered for everything, whatever course you want me to go to, sure. Whatever class you want me to go to, I'm in. And then when I got hurt on duty and lost my vision, military says you can't see, you can't shoot. We don't need you. Well, then they medically discharge you and say, well,
yeah.
Sorry, so sad. And then, okay, well, they tell me you're no longer Sergeant Kaufman. Well, who am I?
Right.
Who is Richard?
Right. Who's Richard?
And I find a lot of veterans, even first responders, once we take off that uniform, because we became so much of that person was that uniform, we kind of get it mixed up. Like a lot of us, when we got pulled over, we never showed them our driver's license. It was always our military ID.
Right.
That was our whole being. And when you're no longer that, it's hard. It's a struggle to find out, to reinvent and reimagine ourselves. Are you hearing a lot of that now?
Yeah. I think it's consistent. I think it's still, when you think about the way that we come out of the military, 1 minute you're in, again, this honor-based collective tribe. And then the next minute you're in an individual contract society where it's every man, every woman for themselves. That's a hell of that's like changing planets, And so there's always going to be that going on. And then when you add to it, so there's a loss of identity if we allow it to happen. Now, I'm of the belief, and I wrote a little book called Mission America, Straight Talk about military transition. I need to get you a copy.
Oh, yeah. I would love an autographed copy.
Of course. But what I say in that book is that we actually have a choice. We have agency in our life, and we get to decide what we keep when it comes to our purpose, our identity, and our passion. The problem is we run all the way up until the finish line because we don't want to leave the Army in most cases. It's our world that we know and we understand. And so we don't put a lot of thought, Richard, to who I truly am. Why am I here? What is it beyond the next ridgeline that I'm going to do? How can I serve? And it's just too terrifying. So we just delay that shit and we focus on where I'm going to get a job, what society wants me to do, how I'm going to acclimate. We go through TAPS or whatever thing's called. And that's our transition. And the reality is we ignore the most important aspect of our transition, which is our identity, which is our sense of purpose, which is our ability to make meaning out of our lived experience. How do we take what we did in this world and make meaning of it in this new world? And if that is hard, it's hard enough for anybody in transition to do. But when you're coming out of the military and you don't have much time, the time to do that, if you can, is while you're wearing that uniform. If you can. But even if you're out, even if you're a Vietnam veteran, a Korean War veteran, in my assessment, it is never too late to make meaning out of your lived experience. As long as we're breathing and as long as we're on this earth, there's nothing written anywhere that says that you're supposed to suffer because you served at a higher level. And I just don't buy it.
But it's something else I see a lot of people struggle with, and I was one of them. If you have a job in the military and say if you're just in the rear with the gear, that's one thing. But if you're like, tank commander, if you're one of these up tempo kind of guys where there's nothing like sending rounds down range, at 60 miles an hour, when you get out, there's no way to fulfill that rush anymore.
Well, no, but and that's fair. I mean, how do you replace being an SF guy or a ranger or a tank crew member? I don't know that you can ever literally replace what you did in that moment, but there is also this notion that Stephen Pressfield writes about, wonderful author and former Marine himself, that he, there's the hero's journey, which is the journey we go on, and we go off on this journey and we go through these struggles and we come home changed. We've learned something about our life. And is that it? Right? Do we put the pistol in our mouth at that point? No. Can we go back to what we did in that journey? No. Right? But what we can do is we can take that lived experience that we have and we can put it to use in the next level. We can put it to use on the next ridgeline. We can put it to use in the service of others, something bigger than ourselves. And that is something we're capable of. And it will never probably look like what it looked like in combat or in the inside of a tank, but we can take all those attributes and put them to work. And look, I can't speak for you or anybody else. I know for me, once I started to figure that out, I started to find real renewed purpose in my life. And I felt like the journey was worth taking and not quitting on. And that's my hope for anybody, is because, man, I mean, let's face it, what we did is a young man's game. And we can only do that for so long. And then we have to quietly exit the stage and go play a different role. The question is, are we going to accept that and find a deeper purpose to do it? And it's not easy, but I do think it can be extremely fulfilling. And I also think that residue that we carry in our body, whether it's survivor's guilt, PTS, moral injury, I do believe that residue can either harden inside of us and kill us, or it can be metabolized just like any other residue, and we can live a life worth living. I choose the latter.
And me too. Now, I just had Lieutenant Colonel Brian Slade on. He wrote the amazing book called Cleared Hot. And we were talking about how we always talk about, you always hear about post-traumatic stress, but you don't really hear much about post-traumatic growth. And we don't talk about recovering from moral injury because you never hear the term moral injury.
Right.
So let's talk about moral injury a little bit. So for people that never even heard the term moral injury.
Yeah, I don't even think it's diagnosed as in the mental health world yet. It's more of a syndrome, but a lot of professionals are starting to see it for what it is and acknowledge its existence. You know, moral injury has been in our lexicon in the military. Certainly in the post 9/11 arena, there were, it was experienced at various levels, but I think with the Afghan abandonment, moral injury really came to the spotlight, Richard, as a strategic concern, because so many of the veteran population and military family population saw what happened with abandoning our allies. And it just ran in the face of what we were taught through all those years of combat. And then to see our leaders, particularly military leaders at senior levels who we had served faithfully and loyally, silent on this, both active duty and retired, I think it added to that. And again, I'm not making that up. Like, these are things that were said to me over and over again in the interviews I did for Operation Pineapple Express, dozens of interviews. And so when you talk about post-traumatic growth, which I do believe that we are capable of metabolizing the residue that's in our bodies and growing and living a fulfilled life. I do believe that. And that's the path I'm on. I think I have my moments when it's dark, but that's the path I'm pursuing anyway. I also think that just like moral injury, the antithesis of that can be moral recovery. I do believe that recovery from a moral injury is possible. However, I don't think it's as possible if there is not a mechanism by which the moral injury can be addressed. The first thing that has to happen is we have to shine a light on it. There has to be not just an acknowledgement of it, but ownership of it. Or if you like to borrow Jocko's, extreme ownership, where, he took responsibility for that friendly fire. Like, he owned it, but you didn't see that. You don't see that right now in our ranks. You don't see that in the military. You see, and I've met with guys from the 82nd who were part of Operation Pineapple Express, in the sense that they were on the other side of the wire pulling people through. I met with these guys off post at Bragg, and I will tell you, they are suffering from immense moral injuries of facing out to a crowd of thousands while grown men are holding their babies who are purple in the face, suffocating from tear gas, begging them to help them, and the Marines the same way, and what they endured. Like, no one is addressing the moral injury that occurred specifically from the abandonment, the systemic abandonment in Afghanistan. And we need leaders to step into that arena and do that and help take that on, because if we don't, then the guys and girls that experienced it are just going to keep churning that over in their mind. They're not going to see any meaningful moves by our leadership to address the injury, and there's not going to be any assurances in place that it won't happen again. And all of those things conspire, I believe, Richard, to keep us in the moral injury realm. If we're going to recover, this has to be a combined effort with our institutional leaders at the political, diplomatic, and military level to acknowledge what happened, take some responsibility for it, and then step into the arena with the rest of us, and let's try to figure out a way through this.
But I think, and I'm not a big political guy. I mean, I have my own opinions. But the American people, even veterans, we're very forgiving people. If somebody would just say, get up to a podium and be like, listen, guys, I fucked up. I'm sorry. Let's get this shit straight. Let's see what we can do. Everybody would get behind whoever it was, because we realize everybody makes mistakes. But if there's, leadership is from the top, all the way down to the private. And if there's no leadership that's willing to take accountability, then we're never going to see any kind of change. Right.
I think that's the point. I think Stu has made that point in his book, and what he talks about. And I don't think it's a radical thing. It's certainly not a political thing. It's not partisan. We expect, this is what was expected from us as leaders, as non-commissioned officers and officers. We were expected to walk a certain path and toe a certain line and adhere to certain standards, right? I mean, that's what we were held to, and we did it. And if we didn't, we were held to account. There has been a complete overt violation of that from the most senior levels, like the presidential level, down through Congress. I'll give you an example, and it's in the epilogue, but I received, after the explosion, a call from a special advisor to Vice President Kamala Harris for Pineapple to help get their favorite Afghan out. Now, this is a call coming from an advisor inside the White House, right, to a group of veteran volunteers who are using their cell phones to get people out. Now, that's the level of, in my mind, absentee leadership that was in place, right? I mean, certainly that level of leadership could have, with one phone call, could have unleashed the scunion that is Delta Force, the 82nd Airborne, the Marines, who were all salivating to do the right thing. And in many cases, we're doing it anyway. But one phone call could have enabled this individual and others who were extremely high risk to be recovered. But instead, it was covertly handed off to volunteer groups like Pineapple and Dunkirk and others to do their bidding while they maintained a certain front with the administration. I personally have a problem with that. I believe that most Americans have a problem with that. And that's really what I'm trying to address as we go into 2023 is this just can't stand. And not just from a moral perspective, Richard, but as we started this show, Al-Qaeda and ISIS are reconstituting in the very place where they launched the worst terror attack in America's history. And the son of the very resistance leader, Ahmed Massoud, whose father was Shah Massoud, is warning us that the dash lights are blinking red with what Al-Qaeda and ISIS and these other 25 groups are doing in Afghanistan. There's just a report out right now that a machete attack in Times Square, the guy talking said, I wanted to join the Taliban. Yep. Like if we don't pay attention to what has happened here and demand accountability and leadership from our elected officials and our military officials, I believe we're going to reap another attack on this homeland that could potentially make 9/11 pale in comparison.
Now, where I'm sitting, actually, if I go sit on my front porch, it's actually overlooking where the Twin Towers once stood.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew people that were in the towers that day.
Right.
So for me, that day is here every day. And, but I wish we can go back to September 12th, 2001, because that's when there was no Democrat, there was no Republicans. We were just Americans.
Yeah. I agree with you.
And I just wish we could go back or even start thinking like you said, big shit's coming down the pike and we happen to arm them. They got our shit.
Yeah.
But it seems like everybody's just worried about little crappy political stuff. They're not worried about the real stuff going on,
I think I describe it as we're in a trance-like state where it's fear-based, anger-based, because humans, we're still well-dressed Neanderthals. We behave the same primitive, primal ways that we always have when life gets real, right? So if we get angry or afraid, and our modern society has basically spun us up, I call it the churn. It has spun us up into such a frenzied state that the least little thing we disagree with, we rally up with whatever institutional leader says he's for it or she's against it, and that becomes our tribe. And we start demonstrating this thing I call shadow tribalism that is just as tribal as, if not worse, than anything going on in Afghanistan. And we tear each other apart. Sebastian Junger talks about it in his book, Tribe. He says, most veterans are willing to, or have a hard time coming home, and I'm paraphrasing, because while they're willing to die for their country, They have no idea how they're supposed to live for it. And it's hard to live for a country that's tearing itself apart in every imaginable way, along political lines, socioeconomic lines, mask versus no mask, vaccine versus no vaccine. I mean, for those of us living in the day-to-day, for the most part, we can get along with about anybody. But yet we have leaders at an institutional level who are divisionists. They literally divide us along every imaginable line. And because we're getting sucked into these trance-like states where we stay at this elevated arousal level, we fall prey to it. And it's really dangerous. I think we're on a path right now as a civil society that we need to shake it off. We need to shake this trance off and do like you said, and focus on where we were on 9/12/2001, because that is where our strength is, not in our, diversity is actually good, but we should focus more on what binds us than what divides us.
I love it. So now talk to us about, I mean, you're an actor and now you got a play coming around. Yeah. You're going to be traveling. Talk to us about that.
How's that for a midlife crisis?
That's awesome, bro.
Yeah, I wrote a play about 6 years ago called Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret, when my son told me he was going to join the Army. And I felt like at the time, no one even knew we were in Afghanistan. And movies and books weren't really capturing. They were all talking about the first in. I wanted to write a story about the last out. And I was already a storyteller and a speaker. And so I started this little project. And my mentor had been after me to write a one-person play. It ultimately evolved into a multi-person play, but it's a story about 3 team sergeants that I lost in Afghanistan. I rolled them into one composite character named Master Sergeant Danny Patton. And he's a Green Beret, and he's killed in the very first scene. And he's trying to ascend to the warrior resting place of Valhalla, but he can't let go. He's holding on to something. So his best friend, Kenny, who was killed in the Pentagon on 9/11, and is based on my Ranger buddy, Cliff, comes down from Valhalla with several other operators who are shapeshifters, and they were also killed in different wars. And they become all of the people in Danny's life who made his heart pump the most blood. So we followed Danny through when he first went to selection, when he went to the Q course, met his wife, Lynn, had their child, deployment after deployment until 9/11, and then over and over again, as it starts to come off the rails, he's toggled between his living room and his fire base until he finally figures out what he's holding on to, and he lets go. And so the audience goes for the full ride, Richard, and it's civilians that have never heard the crack of a round, Gold Star moms, wounded veterans, guys like yourself who have seen so much combat, all sitting together in this one room. And the performers, including myself, I learned to act at age 50. I play Danny. The performers are all veterans or military family members. So we've lived it. And so it's just this cathartic, emotional 2-hour ride that we go on. Gary Sinise saw it recently and has brought us on. He's producing it. And we're traveling around the country right now in 2023 to help heal the wounds of war, validate those who lived it, and then also inform Americans and politicians on the cost of modern war. So we're traveling around the country as part of Gary's foundation. If you go to lastoutplay.com or scottmann.com, you can find our tour stops. But I really hope people will go see it. If you can't go see it, go to Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Vudu, or Google TV, and the play is there as well on film. And it's called Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret. But it's a powerful, powerful show. All the proceeds go to, Gary's nonprofit. So it's a win all the way around. But it's just a great way, Richard, to help. Either if you lived it like you did, you'll see your story on the stage. Like even though it's Elegy of a Green Beret, it's stuff you lived and your family lived. If you haven't served, you'll feel what it's like in a way that you wouldn't do in a movie or a book. And to sit with someone who's never been around combat is the ultimate. Like a guy like you, if you could get people in the room with you who haven't been to war or who don't really understand, it's an emotional breaching tool to open up those hard conversations. So I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to make a big difference in 2023. I think it's going to help a lot of people. And thanks for letting me talk about it.
Well, if you come to New Jersey and New York, me and my wife, we're definitely going to show up. And
you got it, man.
Because we're all about paying it forward, and especially help raise awareness or raise money, whatever it is. because even like we helped my friend with Charles Strange, he lost his son in extortion 17. You know, if we whatever we can do to bring, you know, let Gold Star families know that they're loved and appreciated, because they don't really get talked about as much.
They don't. We really honor the military family. We honor the Gold Star family. We honor Extortion 17. There's actually a scene in there where we pay homage to the men and the families of Extortion 17. So it's a very I would say it's a very hopeful play. It has the hard realities of combat, but at the end of the day, that play is all about letting go and knowing peace.
I love it. So, like I said, this is probably one of my top 5 books that I've read. Where can we get it? How do we get it? Tell us a little bit about it.
Look, I would say, honestly, I have a pretty broad, vast body of work, Richard. And if folks just go to scottmann.com, you can find out about the play. You can find out about our story workshops, about rooftop leadership that I do on the for-profit side. And certainly the book is there. Just scroll down a little bit and you'll see it. It's also on wherever fine books are sold. Amazon certainly has it. You can go to operationpineappleexpress.com. And if you want to help us, also there's places to donate to our nonprofit work there. We do a lot of work for veterans and a lot of work for the Afghans. All of it's right there at scottmann.com.
And I definitely want to get that other book because I love
Mission America. Yeah.
And the reason why I do this show is because, and I talk a lot about entrepreneurship, because I realize that when a veteran gets out, if they start a business, if they start a nonprofit, if they have a mission again, they're so much less likely to take their own life.
Right on.
So that's why we talk about entrepreneurship also a lot in this show, because when we get out of the military, we make shitty employees. So a lot of us go the entrepreneur route. So guys, make sure you check out this book. Like you've seen this. I mean, I got it marked in and I got it all scruffled up and page turned. Make sure you pick up this book, guys. The first couple pages get you hooked, and you're going to fall in love with the characters.
Also, Richard, thank you for that, man. I also read it. It's on Audible. I read it myself and, tried to bring those acting skills into play where I think I portray like 20 characters in this thing. So it's a pretty fun listen. Not fun, but it's an engaging listen.
And so, yeah, I'm a big Audible guy. I got Goggins' book. I think it's coming up tomorrow. And I think
he's amazing.
Next month, I'll get the Audible version of this, and I want to read it while I'm actually listening to it.
I know several people have done that, and they've really enjoyed doing that. It's you get some new angles that you didn't get before.
So, guys, make sure you pick up the book, Operation Pineapple Express. Make sure if you can check out my brother, he's all over social media. Check out his website. And, guys, I don't have my T-shirt on today, but normally the T-shirt I have on says, "Today I decide." Those are the 3 most important words. Like Joel Osteen talks about, I'm a big Joel guy. We have, we can decide to either be the victim or the victor. So, guys, hopefully today you guys can decide you rather be the victor than the victim. Sir, I just want to say thank you so much. I want to, if you can personally thank your young lady who put this together for us. I just want to say thank you.
Absolutely.
She's done so much to keep us in touch. So give her a big thank you.
Yeah, Elizabeth's amazing. Thank you.
All right, guys. So remember, vertical momentum, the only way to go is but up. And I will catch you guys tomorrow. Sir, have an amazing week.
Thanks, brother. Take care.